There he is, the legal eagle, joining me live, and you're under the weather. We want to warn people. Do you want to read the text that you sent me, or can I read what you sent me about what you sound like?
Sure. It's a reference younger people will not get, but I think your audience will. I shouldn't have said that.
You said, warning, I have a cold and I sound a little like Deborah Winger.
A little bit. A male Deborah Winger, maybe.
Well, I'm sorry you're under the weather. I appreciate you joining me. I appreciate you going live with me. I know that means you have to hold back on in ways you don't normally.
No thunder. Sorry. Go ahead.
All right. Well, what do we have to talk about? There's a few issues that I obviously want to ask you about, but just in terms of the Supreme Court arguments that have been heard since the last time that we talked, I've almost lost track. But there's also been some decisions. What do you want to say about what's transpired?
I want to talk about something that happened yesterday that the media is not really reporting on. I mean, it's a headline here and there. Sorry, Pete, but no one is really reporting on it, which is that some Maine legislator made some very terrible anti-trans comments. The Maine legislature then censored her and penalized her and punished her in ways authorized by Maine law and Maine statutes, which I think might have been a First Amendment violation. So I'm not discussing whether the legislature was correct in saying this person couldn't vote anymore because of the things she said. But what's weird is she made an emergency motion to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court granted it and told the state of Maine, the legislature, you're not allowed to apply your rules to this person this way, even before the case is heard in the lower courts. This thing the Supreme Court is doing, Pete, of intervening in lower court cases as, unquote, an emergency basis on a regular basis now is really terrible. And I want folks to think about the states' rights aspects of all of this, right? The legislature says what you said is terrible and horrible and disqualifies you under our rules. We're going to suspend you until we figure this out. That she files a lawsuit, which is fine. She might win that lawsuit. Maybe she should. I'm not taking a position on the merits, Pete. But that lawsuit doesn't belong in the Supreme Court of the United States. It belongs in lower courts like all other suits. The reason the court did this, obviously, is this is a case about political correctness and trans rights and all that stuff. Justices Jackson and Sotomayor dissented. Jackson writing, and she was angry. Not about the merits of the case, but about what are we doing? What are we doing here? This is not our business yet. This is a big deal, Pete. Like the court is just is thrusting itself in places it never has before.
Make it more serious in terms of, all right, like I'm always lowering the bar in terms of the news and the developments. And I think like, well, how exactly does that impact the country, the planet, my community, me, my family? So this woman says something terrible, offensive about trans people. They censure her, they suspend her. Then the Supreme Court steps in and says, you can't do that, state, Maine. Well, so what, Eric? Let me just let that go. I don't care if the court's going to step in and tell the state they can't reprimand somebody. It's awful. I don't like it. I wish they weren't doing it. Doesn't seem right the way you describe it, certainly. But how does that, what is that setting a precedent for the court to do with other state rights that might have more consequence in my life or my community, my family, the country, whatever?
It's a great question, Pete. This one isolated instance, if this happened 15 years ago, would have been like, oh, the court kind of lost its mind for a moment. Who cares? Even 8 years ago. It is another brick in the wall of just one of the main themes of the Roberts Court, which is we get to decide everything at all times. It's all up to us. We get to decide everything. And this plays out in incredibly important ways, like the disqualification case, where the court took the issue and said, we're deciding this for everybody for all time. That affected you a lot, believe me. During COVID, when the governors of California and other states were trying really hard during an emergency to kind of figure out the space between shutting things down and free expression and religious freedom, those were all really hard issues, Pete, during an emergency, and we elect people to deal with it. And that's when this started. The court started intervening in cases before the cases were done on the so-called emergency basis. That's not our system. And by the way, in 1983, the people who would have been criticizing this would have been Republicans and conservatives who would have said, let the cases, if it's a true emergency, okay. But that's very rare. What this is doing is it's cutting off fact finding, it's cutting off lower court proceedings, and it's funneling everything to the court on an untimely basis. So we get, and of course, Steve Vladeck has written all about this on the shadow docket, we get no explanations or very poor explanation. This case has no explanation to it, Pete. So they basically, if you believe in states' rights and you believe that New York State should have the right to run its schools the way it wants to, and someone gets offended by something and the court swoops in on an emergency basis, it matters a lot. And this is something the court never used to do. Like the Warren Court almost never did this. It's now becoming common. And, you know, the justices have a hard enough time, I think somebody wrote this once, acting like a court, when you also give them this ability to swoop in before the facts are settled and the lower courts have looked at it. It's really bad. And especially when the Supreme Court is basically running a Fox News operation, it gets even worse.
Right. Well, you know, by the way, I'm just thinking as you're talking there, it's one of the reasons why your voice is so important is because you understand the history of the Supreme Court in our lifetime, and you can educate us as to when something is unprecedented that the court is doing. And we know, because we've been talking to you forever, that you have the credibility and trust that this is not a bias of yours. That's a fact. Like the court did or did not do this thing forever or a long time. So to see the court in this case intervening this way and to have your experience and credibility is just another great credit to why your voice is so important, and you can't stop talking even if you wanted to, because we need your perspective because you're an older con law scholar.
Thank you for all of that, my friend. First of all, what's amazing is the court has changed more in my lifetime than quite possibly in the 190 years before that. Seriously, I mean, in my 30 years of a law professor, 34. But going to the other thing, the court in 2000. I have to remind people that in 2018, I made a living. And 2019, going around the country saying liberals are wrong about the Supreme Court. They're just wrong. They think the court is so much worse today. And it's not. And even when the court reverses Roe, which I predicted they would do on your show and elsewhere, I said, even that, it's just the same old Supreme Court. And I said that in the middle of the most conservative court in American history. That changed. It changed with Amy Coney Barrett. I have to get people to see this. A 6-3 Fox News majority is different than a 5-4 Fox News majority. It's really different. It allows Roberts and Barrett to play a role of pseudo judge, of sometimes we'll give a little bit to the liberals and to the, you know, so it's not all partisan, but everything important is partisan. Everything. And in 2018, that wasn't true because of Justice Kennedy, and before that, Justice O'Connor. And before that, Souter and Blackmun. And before that, White and Stevens, when justices did not just vote political party lines, but now they do.
Boy, that might be one of the most important minutes I've heard from you in a while, to that perspective, which is, you've said it before. I'm not sure if I've heard it quite so succinctly or put that way, but really important. And we can talk about why in a larger conversation. I want to get through a few more things. I know you have limited time today. Habeas corpus. Let's not do Latin, but it's clear that the Secretary of Homeland Security didn't know what it meant. And she's a former congresswoman, I believe. She was a former governor. And now she's, of course, the Secretary of Homeland Security. So you would think she would certainly know the simple thing that most people with an education on civics and law just a little bit know. But even if you didn't know, you would probably understand what it meant in terms of your rights. So where do you want to start, or what do you want to say about the Trump administration people who are going, you know, and testifying in front of committees like this Homeland Security Senate committee yesterday, and they don't seem to understand people's rights and why they matter, why this idea has always mattered, that you can challenge if you get told you're in trouble, you can challenge it.
There are so many things to say about this.
Say it. Hey, you're in trouble. Could I ask a few? No, you can't ask any questions.
There are so many things to say about this little snippet, Pete, that are just so crazy. So first of all, it's not that she didn't know what it was. She said what she said is the exact opposite of what it is. What habeas corpus is a limit on the executive's ability to arrest people without legal cause. How do we stop in a free country? How do we stop the president or in a state, the governor, from arresting someone just for no reason? I don't like your hair color. Go to jail. Segall, I hate the fact that you hate the Celtics. Go to jail. Whatever. What stands between that and a free country is habeas corpus. What she said was it allows the president to deport people, whenever he wants to. It's the opposite. She viewed it as a tool of presidential power as opposed to a limit on presidential power. Now, I trust that she really didn't know what it meant. So she could have said, and this gets to the really important part of this piece, she could have said to the committee, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a law professor. I never pretended to be. Pardon me for not knowing the literal definition of habeas corpus. Now, we would have made fun of her for that, right? That still would have been a bad thing. But what it would have revealed was some humanity and some ability to appreciate one's weaknesses. Instead, she does what all Trump appointees do. She went 180, became very dogmatic, very smug about an issue she knows absolutely nothing about, when her job is to know everything about that issue, Pete. Her job is to weigh the needs of the country against the freedom of people. Like, that's her job. So that's really terrible. And then it gets to the largest point of all, which you and I discussed ad nauseum in 2016, and which I tried to spread in various outlets, I think including the New York Times at one point, when I said that Trump is the very first president ever to have never served a second in the government or in the military. Now, the response to that by so many people, even some people on the left, was, Eric, you don't get it. We want to break everything down, right? We want to tear everything down. So no one is better to do that than someone coming from the outside. To which I said, that's a reasonable position if the person coming in has some awareness of anything. But that's not a reasonable position for Donald Trump, because all he understood from the day his father was served by the Nixon administration with a lawsuit that you're discriminating on the basis of race in your rental apartments. From that moment forward, Donald Trump hated government. He hates government.
Well,
Even Ronald Reagan distrusted government come 1980.
Well,
he never hated government.
If you're gonna psychoanalyze him, we've all been doing this for over 10 years now. The easier way to put it is he does not want anybody to tell him what to do, that there are any rules about anything around what you can do, where you can build a building, whether or not it should get a tax abatement, what ingredients you can put in the cement, anything about your loans, your financing for the building or your business. And I think there's a ton of Americans, certainly there's a thread or a strain of MAGA, that also doesn't like to be told what to do by anybody, which is why they own their own businesses and drive Ford F-150s. Moving on.
Wait, hold on. I do want to give an analogy, okay? Because I've been thinking about it a lot. So imagine a family of four that's truly dysfunctional, like truly dysfunctional. There's emotional abuse, there's physical abuse, but they all kind of want to get along and they just don't know how to do it. And so they seek help. I understand the position that you wouldn't seek help from similarly situated families that failed. I get that. But you wouldn't seek help from someone who's never, ever been a parent. You would never do that, because they would have no ability to deal with the complexity of being a parent. Yeah. We hired someone who wants to destroy it all to fix it, and who has no experience in fixing it, and who views himself as the victim of it his entire life. It's the world's craziest thing that's happening. And Pete, you made a joke earlier about me not talking anymore. The non-personal side of that is whatever's going to bring us back from this. I just don't think it's going to be lawyers, law professors, law. I don't think it's going to be law related.
No, you're talking about the nuance required to understand an issue or just make decisions. But I think that your expertise and the understanding of our history and our values and the way that laws play, it matters so much. I mean, I think sometimes I think like you, or a police officer or even a physician, anybody who's like has a specialty, they see a lot of bad stuff or they know the outcome of how things shake out. It gives you a biased view that prevents you from seeing the whole forest. And in your case,
I agree with that, Pete. I do agree with that. Let me just say,
the rule of law is something that you have a deep understanding for, and people in your lane do, but most of us don't. And then, by the way, if I do have an understanding of it because you taught me it in one of our conversations, I forget it. It's so important that we continue to talk about a society and a civilization that has a certain standard and that has had a certain standard, to remind people, because it's very easy. I'm learning, which is what's so great about the podcast and the community and our hangouts, is to lose yourself in a different reality. Like, is this happening? Did he just say that? Can they do that? It's important that we connect to remind each other, no, you can't do that. Yes, he did say that. It's not a joke. And here's what we should do about it. Or at least, even if we can't do it, even if we lose everything, here's how we should feel about it.
Well, I was just before we came, before we came on the pod, I was watching a TikTok. Apparently, the Republicans want to lessen or reduce or end taxes on tanning beds. That's
on tanning beds.
Yes, they want tanning beds to be cheaper and more available, and tanning bed owners to have more profits. And that's obviously a silly, stupid, small thing. Except it's not. With all the suffering going on, with cutting Medicaid, with cutting all of the programs that America needs. As you know, Peter, really, really, really dear friend of mine died from ALS at 72, and it was a horrible decade of horribleness. And they want to cut funding for ALS research, and all this stuff. At a time when all of that is happening, and they want to take time out to worry about tanning bed salons, it's really hard.
You're saying, given the perspective and seeing how, watching these,
watching my country do this is really hard.
The markup of this reconciliation bill is representative of the morality of the people marking it up.
Yeah.
And the idea that a lot of Americans buy the phrase work requirement.
Yeah.
Work requirement. There's a work requirement for you to get health insurance. I wish people would sit with that for a while.
I agree.
Because none of the rest of the world has a work requirement. Health insurance. It's, you better get up and go make some shit right now. If you think, by the way, probably while you're making that shit, you're going to sustain a long-term injury or impingement that you're going to need, but inadequate healthcare for at best. But it's such a gross work requirement. So yes, now it's all right. Let me ask you this here at the end. We talked before last week's arguments on birthright citizenship, and more importantly, whether or not lower courts can have nationwide injunctions. We had a great conversation about it because you inserted all the nuance which is required and a lot of the maybes and a lot of the different gradations of that conversation, which I think were important. We haven't talked to you since we heard the arguments. You had the best take, as is often the take, which is, even if the court decides 7-2 against this, it's up to Pam Bondi. The court doesn't have a military, I think was basically the take. So what did you think of the argument and make that point better than I did?
Yeah, the best point I can make, Pete, I think, is to compare it to something else. So pardon me. I promise I will get right back to the question. In 2008, there was a real open question. Do non-American citizens in Guantanamo Bay have the right to habeas corpus? That was the question. Traditionally, aliens only have habeas corpus rights if they're in America. Everybody in America, by the way, back then, the overwhelming assumption about everybody was if you're on American soil, you have habeas corpus. Justice Scalia said that. Everybody, doesn't matter if you're a citizen or not, if you're on soil. But the question was, what if you're not on American soil? What if America kidnapped you in Afghanistan, brought you to Guantanamo Bay, now you're not, which belongs to Cuba technically. And the big issue was, do they get habeas corpus?
Yeah.
And I predicted correctly that they would rule 5-4 with Justice Kennedy going with the liberals, that they would find that they have habeas corpus rights. And they did, in a really great opinion, Pete, in a really good opinion that explained why America just can't put people in safe houses around the world and then deny them habeas corpus. That's just not a thing if we should do. It was a great decision, and the court never enforced it. And it got so bad that the non-enforcement got so bad that the D.C. Court of Appeals, which was all those cases ended up going to the D.C. Court of Appeals. They were confused. They were flummoxed. The court gave them no guidelines. The court never granted cert again and still hasn't to this day in any Guantanamo case, where several judges on the D.C. Circuit, they ended up, saying almost nobody gets out because they didn't want to release terrorists. And they didn't know what the legal standards were, and the court would never tell them. So several lower court judges wrote to the Supreme Court basically and said, you're not doing your job. You gave us this great case in 2008 and said nothing since. We need more guidance. We need more backbone. We need this and that. And the court never did. So this argument that happened last week, if the court does decide 7-2 that emergency injunctions are sometimes appropriate, and in the case of deportations, everybody gets due process and the rule of law, whatever the court does over this term on those issues, unless they either find a way to enforce it themselves, which is unlikely, or Congress gets in the game, then of course, who's going to trust Trump and Biondi to follow the court's orders? They've already flagrantly violated it. Get this guy back from El Salvador, the court said. Facilitate his trip back. And they haven't done it, and they double speak. They're like, we're complying with the court order. Are you bringing him back? No, we're never going to do that. Are you complying with the court order? Yes. Are you bringing him back? No, we're never going to do that. That's like saying, I have 2 children, I have 4 children. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So my point here is, the big point is the American people, and especially important media people, political actors and members of Congress and local governors need to understand this is not going to end by the Supreme Court. It might end because they shoot themselves in the foot. It might end because MAGA deconstructs. Trump may die. The American people might come to their senses. All of that might happen, people.
Right.
But we need a strategy to get there that does not include the partisan Republican subcommittee that we call the Supreme Court of the United States.
I noticed you did not mention nuclear holocaust or Jesus' return. Let me just ask you this at the end. I know you got to go, but and I wish I had the clip ready, but I'm not that savvy yet. You've seen the discussion generally, and I think they've made a legal argument, or specifically regarding Marco Rubio yesterday, the Secretary of State, and everything else. He's doing everything. He's National Security Advisor. He's head of USAID, the archives. He's also a greeter.
I think he's playing shooting guard for the Knicks too.
She's a shooting guard for the Knicks because his ears are so big that they set.
No, I mentioned that because of Trump's continual discussion of his height during the 2016 primary.
Oh, that's right. Well, never forget. Seriously, never forget how terribly he treated Marco Rubio and his family, and how horrible Marco Rubio spoke about him. And now that's let bygones be bygones, apparently. So there's this legal argument that the courts can't tell the president, specifically, I guess in this case, the Secretary of State at the State Department, how to conduct foreign policy. Do I have that right? Are you familiar with? Have you heard this?
That's what people are saying, but it makes no sense.
I don't think it makes sense either. And I
this drives right to the heart of it. It's 1952. Yeah. President Truman is like best friends with the entire Supreme Court. He plays poker with them. They're all Democrats. The Korean War is going on, and there's going to be a nationwide strike. And President Truman does not want to use certain tools available to him to get rid of the strike, which he could have done, but then it would have alienated labor, which he didn't want to do. So he goes out, he basically announces to the world, this strike can't happen because our boys and girls in Korea will die if we don't have steel for guns and tanks. So he eventually seizes the nation's steel mills, which had happened 3 times in World War II, 15 years earlier, and says, I have to run these steel mills for a few years or for a limited time because otherwise our boys and girls are going to die.
The government, the federal government has to take over the steel mills, or else we will lose the war and Americans will die.
Private companies. The private companies don't like this for obvious reasons. They go to the courts in 3 months, goes from lower court to Supreme Court on an emergency basis, at the time, one of the quickest ever to get to the Supreme Court. And a totally Democratic Supreme Court, Truman's a Democrat, tells him, no, you can't do that. You cannot seize private property in times of war. Only Congress can do that. Congress has that power, not you. And And by the way, Truman had said, if Congress acts, I will step down. If Congress uses their authority, which they should, I'll go away. But until Congress does, so he wasn't acting as a tyrant. He wasn't saying, I'm doing this no matter what. He said, until Congress acts, I have to defend our boys and girls. So the court gets involved in foreign policy all the time. In the Roberts Court, they basically, President Bush and Obama both said, Jerusalem is not the capital of Israel, and we can't do certain things. And the court decided that case. The court gets involved in foreign policy all the time. So it's not true to say the court can't dictate to the State Department what they do about foreign policy. What is true is the court can only do that when the Secretary of State acts unconstitutionally, like President Truman was doing in the Korean War, allegedly. So the issue always is the government acting unconstitutionally? If it is, the court gets to act in our system of government. If it's not, the court doesn't. Now, one last thing, if the case is close, this may be unconstitutional, it may not, then it's certainly fair to say, as the court has said, in areas of foreign policy where the issues are close, we're going to defer, obviously, to the political branches to make these decisions if it's a close case. But the court thought President Truman was acting unconstitutionally. It thought Congress was acting unconstitutionally about Jerusalem and Israel. When it thinks that, it tells them what to do all the time on a regular basis.
Right. So it's a dumb argument.
It's stupid puffery. It's just dumb. But then we have the secretary, the director of the IRS, the secretary of the treasurer, the director of the IRS, testify yesterday. He was asked the question: can the president order you to remove tax-exempt status from a nonprofit? This is real important, Pete. He said, I don't know. And the congressman was like, what do you mean you don't know? You're the secretary. You run all this. What do you mean you don't? I don't know if the president can do that or not. Of course, the president can't do that. There are rules that say the president can't do that. Pete, we don't have a, you know what's really happening? We don't have a working government. And the fix for that is not the courts. It is the Congress. I don't understand why Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, they're watching their power go away every single day. I don't understand this.
Just underscoring, that was the guy named Billy Long.
Yes.
This IRS, he's Trump's pick for IRS.
Yes.
And Trump wants to remove the tiny king, our king, wants to remove the nonprofit status of any organization he decides, I guess.
Yes.
And that would be bad. Why?
Because the ACLU and Planned Parenthood will lose their tax-exempt status, and Fox News will be granted it. I'm kidding about Fox News, but you understand, Pete, so much of public policy work in this country on both sides is done by public interest groups. It was the NAACP under the leadership of Thurgood Marshall that got Brown versus Board reversed. It wasn't the Supreme Court. It was a 30-year social movement from tax-exempt organizations. What will happen is all the tax-exempt organizations on the right will keep their status, and all the ones on the left will lose it. That's what's going to happen. And that obviously just means that they would have a very hard time funding these organizations, because people, I know how many of these I've hosted, where rich people come to alleviate their conscience by giving money away, which actually just lowers their taxable income anyway. Before we go, can I ask you a question? Can we switch roles for 1 second?
Sure.
So Trump did a tweet 2 days ago, I think, that, and then he doubled down on it, I think today, that threatens investigations of Bruce Springsteen and what's her name?
Beyonce and Hillary and anybody who performed at fundraisers for Democrats.
Well, here's my serious. It's a silly. Pete, we're in a land of silly and serious. Like, we can't. You're so good at that. It's like your core strength. It's not mine. If he went after Bruce Springsteen with everything he had, if he put Bruce Springsteen on trial, what would happen?
Well, I think he has gone after universities and law firms and networks with, quote, everything he has. And I think we're seeing what's happening there in terms of they make compromises, they bend the knee.
University presidents resign, Pete. I mean,
you've seen the actual consequences that are short term that seem pretty bad. I think the longer term consequences of that are bad. I think going after a specific person is not a generally good idea for the empire, because what they're doing is they're making that person famous. And if that person is someone that has a lot of supporters, in this case, entertainers with millions of fans around the world, bad for them. They look like the empire, which is why.
So my question is, I've talked about this on your.
It's the kind of thing that motivates people to do stuff and to get. When you cross over into the TikTok world where people that are apathetic and young people are now forced to be engaged on something and have something to, maybe in this case, go out in the streets for and fight for. It's like them arresting this black Congresswoman McIver. Like, that was a dumb idea, I think. I think they're testing the boundaries, and I think that was a bad idea. They've just made her famous.
So I want to use, thank you for that, and in the minute we have left. So I want to use all of that, Pete, to circle back to a discussion your audience will know that we've had for 10 years. So let's take my wife's cousins, who boycotted our funeral, who boycotted our wedding because we didn't want gifts. So we said, in lieu of gifts, and we listed 3 charities.
Oh, yeah.
And one was Planned Parenthood. And my wife's cousins are evangelical true believers in Michigan, who boycotted our wedding because we made Planned Parenthood one of the 3 charities that you could give to. Lynn and I met during a Planned Parenthood event, so it was very close to us, personally. Anyway, and Lynn was very close to these people. So this was very disappointing. Here's my question. So my memory is, so let's take hypothetically that despite these people's traditional evangelical values, they're huge Springsteen fans, which they might be.
Yeah.
I think in 2019, if Trump goes after Bruce Springsteen in the most public way possible and really, really threatens his freedom and his liberty,
yeah,
I think people like them, spread out all across America, would go through the following analysis. Well, this is terrible. I don't think Bruce Springsteen should be in jail. I really don't. But abortion, like, that's how my wife's cousin.
Yeah.
But abortion.
Yeah,
abortion part is over. And the only thing I want to say is the longest extended and indirect I told you so, not to you, to the world of all time, is I said in 2000, that if we get rid of abortion as an issue, which is the most near and dear issue to my heart, with 3 daughters, I am pro-choice as radically as it can be. But if we can take this out of the scheme for a temporary period of time, then we can make progress on every other issue liberals care about. So what I'm hoping is, with abortion out of the way, if he keeps going after these crazy things and doing these crazy things, and if this administration becomes the oligarchy we know it's going to become, maybe the absence, if we have true and fair, let me put this, I am convinced that in the next true and fair election, the Democrats would win overwhelmingly. And that's a result of abortion not being part of that debate. That's all I was saying for 25 years. You did a great debate with Mike Dorf and I. Mike Dorf, who was 5 times smarter than I am. I blogged for him. He's an incredibly brilliant law professor. This is the only thing we disagreed about. He disagrees with me about this whole world. He's wrong. Everybody's wrong.
The problem with people who say, I predicted this would happen, is they think that the other things they predict will happen are going to happen, especially when you're right a lot. And I think that's an error, because you just don't know. You don't know. I think your political analysis of that proves, obviously history proves you're right. You gained a tremendous amount of respect in the legal canon as a result of being, I think, right about that. And people have come to more of your views. And so you may be right about future things. I hope you're not, because you are doom and you are often gloom.
Oh, no, I hope I'm right that we have free and fair elections again. Because if we do, I think we're going to get, I'm feeling optimistic about the world if we have actual fair elections.
One of the most interesting things about elections in America, if you follow the history of American politics the last 20 to 30 years particularly, is that Republicans' ideas are so radical, a vast majority, when people know what they are, the vast majority of Americans wouldn't like them. And so they stopped winning elections. They couldn't win elections. So they had to do everything they could to load the decks. And I mean, we never just review that history, but it's so important, from campaign finance to gerrymandering to making it harder to vote for certain people. And that's just the beginning of the list, but those are the big 3. They have made elections. They don't have ideas. They can't win on the ideas. So they have to make it harder for people that don't like their ideas to vote and to win, not to mention the Electoral College. I mean, it's just something that we could almost begin and start every conversation with reminding people in politics.
And make it about personality, which is what they've done.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we could talk about the conversations and the trans thing. It's like the worst thing for Democrats ever. They're still.
So I want to interrupt by saying this. I am Dr. Doom and Gloom, but for Tina and others out there, what I said 5 minutes ago, I want to emphasize. If we have fair elections, I think this will come to an end. So I think the work has to be what Mark Elias is doing and others. Everything has to go into somehow getting us a fair election in 2026.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that's above my pay grade, Pete.
And making sure we have good candidates and not like the other criticism I've made, which is becoming less controversial, is that really old people should not be serving in public office. You shouldn't sign a contract for a new job in the government when you're 79. You can go run an accounting firm. You can go run Walmart. You can do whatever you want, but you don't get to be mayor or governor if you're 79. You work for us. You can't. I mean, this guy, Jerry Connolly, just died today. He died today. It was like a few months ago that they had this huge argument over whether he or AOC, who's clearly the future of the progressive movement, much less the Democratic Party, should be in office. You got to go. Sorry.
What people, most countries deal with this so differently. I'm not talking about China here, but most other countries, they let young people rule the country. But the difference is they really respect their elders and they seek advice and counsel.
Both can. Yes,
absolutely. That's the sweet sauce right there.
Yes. Anyway. Yes. It's like you and me.
Exactly. Who's the sweet sauce?
I just think that all men, my best advice to all 45 and up men is make friends with other men 10 to 15 to as many years older as you can. And I mean this in the most serious way. You and my friend who I hike with every Wednesday, just left, have given me so much wisdom and advice and things to think about and perspective. It's just such a great value to have you in my life for that reason alone. Forget your legal scholar stuff. So thank you for that. And I will let you go.
Thank you, my friend. And I've already droned on your show too often how much you changed and improved my career. So all
right, that's it. Let's kiss.
And life.
All right. Love you, buddy. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah. Bye.
All right. You leave. I'm going to keep talking.
Goodbye.
All right. To those of you that are still here, I just want to mention that, well, first of all, thank you for being here live. And I'll be back here at, I believe, 4:30 with JL Covan, who I don't think I've talked to on the air, on the record, since we were all together in Vegas, those of you who joined us at Pod Jam 2. I mean, there could be some rando YouTubers here with us. I see a lot of my friends are here, at least saying hi in the chat. But, I don't know. Every once in a while, we get some randos. I don't know how to break out of the stand-up subscriber listener feed to get to all the rest of the folks in YouTube, but I'm trying. And I love that you guys are appreciating when I go live with these guests. So come back and join us with JL later today at 4. Is that what I said? JL and I are 4 p.m. It would seem. Yeah. 4 p.m. East. And I will talk to you then. Thank you very much for hanging out. Today's live event was brought to you by Billabong, which is a shirt I got at Marshall's 20 years ago. So you are welcome, Billabong, for all of the press. Are they still a thing? All right. Love you guys. Talk to you later.